Hello, you're listening to Me and Paranormal You with your host, Ryan Singer. Because it's more fun to believe. Hey, everybody. Thank you for listening to another experience of Me and Paranormal You. This is your buddy, Ryan Singer. I know I always say I'm excited for the conversation, but that goes for double today because we have Dr. Roger Nelson rejoining the program after, gosh, it's been 5 years. I can't believe it's been 5 years since our first chat. Doctor, thanks for joining the show again.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's 5 years is much too long for me to remember what we said or did then. But it's really nice to be able to talk to people who have questions about this material.
Yeah, there was something interesting you said. I mean, I also don't have the memory to remember everything we talked about. So I did go back and I made sure and I listened to the interview again, just so I didn't rehash the exact same questions for the listeners. But you said something really interesting regarding that in our first chat about how you love when people have questions as opposed to the person who is just a skeptic and doesn't believe. And they don't have a reason really why they don't believe, right? An uneducated skeptic, I think, is kind of how it was referenced. And you would much rather be approached by someone who says, well, I just don't understand how this works. So maybe that's a good place to start.
How this works, that's been actually in a way the point of all the research that we do is to try to find out how things work. So as long as the project is still running, which it is, and there's actually a second version gearing up as we speak, in any case, as long as it's active, that means we haven't solved the problem or answered all the questions yet. And frankly, I don't. So I won't make any more sort of hand waving, forget about it noises. Instead, how do I think it works? I think that we live in a field of consciousness. I don't think we know about that well enough to even begin to describe it, except in the kind of poetic stuff and the kind of serious, spiritually oriented descriptions that some of our wisest ones, the sages, they will talk about how we are, who we are, and what we are. And very often, that kind of material says consciousness is a kind of fundamental thing. So a consciousness field or being consciousness means something a little different from just being awake or waking up, as we do most mornings. I guess every morning until we don't.
Yeah, or
In any
afternoons.
case, sorry, that's a little morbid sounding, right? Yeah, so how does it work? I think that every one of us has a kind of, we have a mind, right? And the kind of general perception I think most people have is that that's inside the head. But it isn't only inside the head. It's pretty clearly a kind of presence in the wider world. And we have research for decades now asking questions about that. What is this consciousness interconnection, a kind of interaction with the world? We've learned a great deal, and we still don't know exactly how it works. But I think that the mind or consciousness is a kind of extended field. It's like made of something like information, only it's probably better to say meaning, because sometimes when we say information, people just get stuck in bits, ones and zeros. And there is a kind of information that you can describe very perfectly well mathematically. But that's not the kind I think is the material out of which our information field, our consciousness field is made. So back to your individual consciousness and mind, they're not stuck in our heads. And they my consciousness field extends out, and right now it's interacting literally with Ryan's, even though he's, I don't know, maybe thousands of miles away. I don't know exactly where you are, Ryan.
I'm in Ohio this time, so I'm sharing winter with you this time, as opposed
Okay,
to
so
being in
that's
California.
only maybe 1,000 miles or less. But anyway, the point I want to make is that uh, nobody is alone, even though we think we are. So we have certain kinds of habits of thought that um, that we practice, and sometimes I think to our detriment, along the lines of being individuals, being an island, alone unto myself. But we're not. We never were and never will be. The nature of a consciousness, and that not even only human consciousness, but consciousness in general. It's to be connected. So I can promise no real fine scale mathematical model that describes this, but I can give you evidence from a variety of different kinds of experiments that are pretty good support for the idea that your consciousness is an active element in the world.
Well, that's awesome. I mean, I love the way you describe things and the, I mean, we talked to, I come from the, the layman's, I guess, or whatever, or the, the civilian standpoint, and in last time we talked about, I kind of call this stuff like, the juice of the universe, the electricity, the connectivity. And, it's nice when someone like me gets to talk to someone like you who, actually knows kind of what this means to a certain degree, right? Or you can actually, because it's one thing to have, talk about the juice and the electricity. It's another thing to be like, okay, well, we've shown potentially what this electricity or this feeling of being juiced up about the connectivity of things, we've been able to show the data, or in an experimental way we've been able to kind of measure this and
Hmm.
figure out what it is. And you're talking about evidence, or in a couple different models. Can you shine some light on maybe one of those for us here today that you just referenced?
Yeah. First, I want to say I just love that expression, the juice of the universe.
Yeah.
Not bad.
Well, feel free to use it in your next journal article. You don't even have to
Well,
reference me.
right. I definitely would want to give credit where credit's due. Um, I like juicy things in general. Yeah, it's one of my favorite adjectives. I don't use it much, but every once in a while there comes an opportunity, and it's perfect because it's a kind of expression of richness, right?
Yeah.
Excessive richness. So one of the model that I like to think is maybe capable of explaining much of what this kind of experimental work, the kind of evidence that we have for the connection of, let's say, my mind with a random number generator sitting on a table, um, which is such that I can change its behavior a little bit by wishing for it to change. No wires, no bouncing the table or anything like that. Just thinking about it, wanting to see more ones than zeros, wanting to see high numbers instead of low numbers. It's amazing that that's all it takes for a it doesn't happen all the time, but for in an experimental situation is rigorously controlled, there's where there's no other kind of possible connection except your mind reaching out to touch this physical object, a random number generator. And we've been doing not, I mean, we means a lot of people. There are many different laboratories who have done this kind of research. So how does it happen? What I think it may be the case is this information field or consciousness field that I say is not stuck inside your skin or your skull, extends out to the world, and that world includes a random number generator, and you have a kind of intention, an assignment to change the way that random number generator behaves. So going a little bit back into the physics, David Bohm, as a physicist who died in, I think, in the mid 90s or whatever, but he had been writing for years about an implicate order, which is a term I'm pretty sure he invented. An implicate order, which is the universe writ large, but in a particular kind of form, which I think he would use the word potential. There is a potential field called the implicate order, which we cannot access directly. But if we need something, or if somehow there is a need for, let's say, a proton, it can be manifest, will be manifest in the explicate order. That's where we live and where we can actually touch things. So this proton will come into existence out of the implicate order where it always existed in potential. And our future is also in that implicate order. Our minds are partaking of. We're kind of like the mind that I say is spread out from it's not just in my head, but spread out and touches the rest of the world. It's also in the implicate order. It arises out of the implicate order. Everything does. So how does it come to how do we uh, touch the random event generator and change its behavior? So we have access to this kind of transition or transfer of potentials from the implicate order to the realities of the explicate. And so it seems to me possible that the information we constitute, that is us, the information of our structure, what we're thinking about, all that stuff is a source of structure, or it is structure. It is an organized, an amazingly complicated organized mass in the universe. And because it's highly organized, it has information. And the random number generator, which is sitting on the table over there, we almost forgot it, has a defining characteristic, which is that it's completely random. It absolutely does not have any determined future. There is no way for it, no way for us, no way for anybody to know what the next number will be that comes up in the random sequence. But we, as agents of structure, and can, you might say, enfold that random number sequence and change it, because we have structure. It's in a way needy. It doesn't have any structure at all. So it needs some, in some, kind of curious model oriented way. So long-winded way of saying we are the source of structure. The random number generator is completely unstructured and therefore needs some structure. And so that combination is made in heaven, so as they say.
Oh wow. I mean, this is this implicate and explicate order is, which I'm not familiar with until you're laying it out, is kind of blowing my mind in a lot of ways. I want to do this real quick for those listening. We're gonna pop off for a commercial break, and when we come back, we're gonna be talking with Dr. Roger Nelson about implicate, explicate global consciousness project. I want to talk to him about idealism and get his thoughts on that. All things consciousness. Dr. Nelson sharing his very explicate joy of this subject matter, which is just so cool. And we'll be right back. Okay, we're back. Wow.
Wow,
Okay.
that was
Yeah.
quick.
Yeah, we're gonna do that in the we're gonna do that in the future, which will be the past for those listening. But the I wonder, gosh, like the love that you have for the subject matter and the joy you have in sharing the information is very clear. It's very obvious to me, and I think also to anyone who probably listens to you talk about it. So this has been like a lifelong passion. It feels like, and we talked about, I think when you were a kid and the yoga book, and then JB Ryan also inspiring you on this journey, and then how you ended up at Princeton at PEAR Lab, and then the Global Consciousness Project growing out of that work, and which I'm still convinced that the very popular television show Fringe was totally based on all the work you were doing. I still have to get.
What a video or
Well,
TV?
there was this TV show on, basically it was Fox. The network Fox had this other network they started called FX, back in the 2000s, early 2000s. And they had a very popular show that was kind of like there was like their version of the X Files almost, I guess, but it was
Hmm.
on this Ivy League experimental laboratory in a basement of one of the universities doing experiments with consciousness and parallel dimensions and stuff. And it's like, oh, clearly they were just they 100% found their inspiration from Parallel,
Yeah,
in my opinion. So and one of the head scientists there was a real was a, real kook. He had all these crazy ideas, right? But they just might be right. So I was like, oh, okay. It was a really fun show. But the when you're talking about like this, the implicate and the explicate order, it sounds to me like those who listen to this show who are into like the spiritual world, and there's a lot of those people, myself included. There's this idea of the yin and the yang and the duality of things. There seems to be kind of a mirroring effect almost to a certain degree, and one's the possibility and one is the actual, the manifestation, as you said. And I wonder if you find that with a lot of this work, that you seem to, is there like are you seeing a duality and like an under like a foundation of this could happen and this did happen in that way? If that makes any sense at all. I don't even know if I understand the
yeah.
question I just asked.
Well, then we're in the same boat because I never have been very good at talking about or thinking or understanding dualism versus dual aspect monism versus panpsychism and so on. Those are handy and necessary names if you're, in the business of discussing those things, but I'm incompetent because I can't even remember what those things mean very long. So I just kind of live in the empirical world, even though it's a pretty esoteric experimental world. I mean, experiential world. I I know things or believe things anyway that other people will cast aside because it just doesn't fit into their. And here's another one of the isms: the materialistic model that almost everybody lives in, even people who know better, who know options and know good reasons why materialism can't explain everything as I would say most physicists and chemists and indeed even also psychologists. Sometimes the people who are most distant from the hard mathematical framework are the most adamant about how it's got to be done this way. But it doesn't got to be done this way. What I'm, I think that we talk about these like dual aspect monism or panpsychism, which they're different, but they're kind of in the same general direction. They're not they're the kind of models that appeal to me most, and it seem to be the ones that are more likely able to actually explain these kind of interesting things are the ones that don't try to separate um, our world into parts. Um, the reason that that's not such a great idea is that those parts wind up always having to interact or be engaged with each other. And so we might as well set up a philosophy. I mean, Descartes was the most famous person responsible for the idea that there is this and there's that, and they don't mix. Where this is the physical world, that is the mental world, the spiritual world. Those a lot of people think they are completely separate. They cannot be actually separate, though. In reality, we uh, you try to separate your spirit, your mind, your ethereal aspects from your physical aspects, you would simply die. You cannot be a dualistic person who's actually alive. You have to think of yourself as having two aspects at least, maybe more.
Yeah, and they seem to be inextricably meshed together.
Yeah.
Uh, and I do think we do ourselves a disservice when we, because I tend to, and I'm not going to say I blame you for this, but after our last conversation, I think I really started going really headfirst into wanting to learn more about and kind of lean into being an idealist.
Mm.
And the idea that consciousness, is kind of the foundation of every, and I have a very rudimentary understanding, of the philosophy itself. But when it comes to a lot of the work I'll do, which is, like paranormal research, going to places and, or trying to communicate with, what I think might be spirits or things like that, I do believe consciousness is the key to everything when it comes to just the way we live our lives. And you talk a lot about, like, we all have these and I hope I'm getting the terminology correct, if I can remember it. As individuals, we have our individual consciousness, and it extends almost in a limitless way, or much further than we maybe previously thought, right?
Mm.
And that can interpenetrate other people's consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
which is also doing the same. And then when we're sharing emotions or events, like the Global Consciousness Project is using the eggs or the number generators or event generators to measure, we we are now interacting. Our consciousnesses are now interacting with one another, and now it's shared, creating the global consciousness. Is that a fair interpretation?
I think it's beautifully put. Yeah.
Well, I'm basically using your exact as much as I can remember your exact words. So yeah, I think you've done a beautiful job laying it out. Now, when it comes to I guess if we can, let me try to jump inside your brain for a minute, which is a dangerous thing for me to do. But if we all can understand that we have these individual consciousnesses that ultimately interact and intermesh with one another, creating the global consciousness. Um, that is, and if we can get to that point where we understand this, and then not to say that there's a responsibility, but essentially there is, that we
Mm.
are connected to one another, and that can help us. The way you've laid out, on the website and some of your other, writings, there is, it helps us really understand how we're all together, right? And it changes the way, hopefully, that we look at the actions we take in the future when it comes to the earth, to war, etc. Is there a key component or a stumbling block that's in the way for so many of us when it comes to truly understanding this fundamental truth?
Yes, I mean that's a kind of question that could have a bunch of different answers in a way, but what it makes me think of is the kind of thing that Gurdjieff taught, which was that we are asleep almost all the time, that we have the possibility, the capability to wake up, and the difference between being asleep is and awake in this context is something like the difference between being reactive at best versus proactive. So if we decide to do something, then we, at least in the moment of deciding, we're awake because it is I who has made this decision, and I am now proceeding, and I am actually alive, you know. But if I'm just kind of responding to the alarm clock or to somebody's question, then I maybe, sort of automate a kind of automaton, um, going through the motions, but without the intention and the deep engagement or the powerful engagement of our, intellectual and emotional capability. So I hope I'm answering that question, the question that you asked.
Yeah, I think so. And it's just to me it kind of sounds like what you're describing is thoughtfulness, in a couple
Well,
different
yeah,
ways, right?
a lot of people talk about mindfulness.
Mindfulness.
It is that too. That's a mode of meditation that a lot of people that has become popular in the last couple of decades, I guess, taught by people like Thich Nhat Hanh and John Kabat-Zinn. There are plenty of other people, but it's in some sense it's even more than that. I'll go back to Gurdjieff. There's a little book called Meetings with Remarkable Men, and I'm pretty sure in that book, sort of late in the book, there's a chapter where he talks about planning the new year, planning his new year. At a certain point every year, he would sort of lean back from all the hectic and in some, the exotic and wonderful interactions he was having with other people, and and think about and then ultimately decide what the next year would be. And he goes on in that context a little bit about what the importance of a decision is. Did we talk about this before? If
Um, you know, I I think
what
this is something that is so on the forefront of my mind right now. Before
really?
we had this, before we jumped online today, I was thinking about being very clear and deciding what my next year was going to be.
Yeah.
So I love how this is going right now.
Well, Gurdjieff was a very interesting. A lot of people don't like him, but I consider him to be a wonderful teacher. Um, he said, you can have intentions, and they will kind of outline possibilities that you're considering, and you might give some energy to manifesting an intention, but a decision is a completely different thing. It is a sacred covenant where you make the decision about what your life is going to be now or next and next after that. So it's a very it's not a concept that most people have, but I think it's and I wish I were expressing it better. It's worthwhile getting that little book just to find how Gurdjieff would say it. But it's basically a commitment of all the resources. It's in a way, it's beyond a commitment. It's like an exclusion of other possibilities. Your decision is so uh, forceful and so determinative that you will do that. You won't do something else instead.
Wow, I love that because in the world of the woo woo, which I'm firmly entrenched. There's something called negative manifestation where you obsess about something you don't want so much that people will say that you bring it to pass because the universe or whatever
Hmm.
force out there, it keeps getting the signal from you like, oh, they keep wanting debt, I keep hearing debt from this person, I should give them debt, right? And so I love this idea of the not only is it a decision about what you want, it's an exclusion of other things. to me that shows a, I don't know, purity is not the right word, but a real vision on a real, a clarification of
Yeah.
vision, which I think probably is very important when it comes to, actually manifesting or getting what you want,
Hmm.
or whatever outcome that you're seeing for yourself. I wonder when it comes to like parapsychological work, and we're talking about the rigorous standards of laboratory settings and things like that, which you're very familiar with. There's a belief aspect, right?
Oh yeah.
That contributes to the success of these experiments. And I wonder, could we? Am I making too big of a bridge here to
No,
tie these things together?
I don't think so. One of my favorite people in parapsychology, she died many years ago, but that was Gertrude Smidler. She was a she was a highly respected professor of psychology at, I don't know, Columbia or one of the New York State universities in Manhattan. And she was the one who decided to do some, quite a few experiments that drew on standard, well understood psychological protocols. But in this case, what she wanted to do was find out, are there maybe two, or there could be more, but at least two kinds of people who come to do these experiments? And she called them sheep and goats. Uh, and basically, the sheep were people who believed, who were quite confident that this stuff is real and I can do it. And the goats were people who are a bit, way skeptical. They might be willing to try the experiment, but they're pretty sure it isn't going to work. So, and the difference in scoring, as you can imagine, between the goats and the sheep is immense. The goats often don't achieve anything, and sometimes they actually, what we would call, go backwards. They not only don't get high numbers, they actually get an excess of low numbers when they're trying for high, allegedly trying for high. So it's a wonderful concept, and it's probably quite true in so many ways. It isn't just parapsychology experiments, but in the work of living, in the beautiful paths that we carve through the potentials for our future. So being optimistic, being a believer in the possibilities seems like a really good idea. And it's supported by Gertrude Smidler's sheep goat research.
Well, I love that. The the tagline, the subtitle of this podcast, when I first started it almost 10 years ago, is "It's more fun to believe." So, I feel like you have just provided me scientific backing for for such a thing.
It is fun. I'm sure you feel, and most people who sort of happen upon this notion realize that there's belief and then there's belief. Sometimes people believe things for which there's really no good reason at all, and they wind up being disappointed, or maybe um, are taken advantage of by people who focus on those beliefs and kind of like, you know. So we have to be. I know there's a wonderful aphorism for this. It's close to the thing that we say about skeptics, or skeptics say about us, which is you should be open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brains fall out.
Yeah, yeah.
That's not the same thing, but there is undoubtedly some clever way of saying
Yeah,
other business about, don't believe without some good reason for believing, I would say. Yeah.
yeah, it makes me think we could make one up on the spot. I mean, if you find someone with a really open mind, you also find someone with a really open wallet for a lot of these, like, the exploitation of belief, when someone's willing to believe, like you mentioned, it is, yeah, I guess discernment's an important aspect to a lot of this.
One of
And
my favorite terms.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there, because I mean, hey, I'm not gonna act like I've lacked discernment from time to time, but it is it's you talked previously in our first talk, and just as a reminder, people can go back and listen to that. It's experience 213. Just go to the podcast feed and search for Dr. Roger Nelson, you'll find it. But we talked about how at at the end of the day, we know how to sort things as a species, and we we will stop using something or doing something
Hmm.
if it doesn't work for us, right? And I think when it comes to what we're talking about here specifically, it's a good example. Like if manifestation, if positive thinking, if believing, if conducting parapsychological experiments in a lab, if they just never presented any kind of results ever, you know researchers, scientists, doctors like yourself, you'd stop devoting so much of your time to it, right?
Yeah, I wonder if I might have mentioned the business of prayer before, because what you're saying sounds very much like an argument that you can make. That it's not so strange to believe that there could be something like um, mental interaction with another person or mental influence on a material object. We have been praying forever. We've probably started praying about the same time we started, talking, wishing the same kind of thing. In any case, as you say, we don't keep on doing something if it's really a stupid waste of time. So if we have always prayed and we're still praying, it seems very likely that we have come to understand, maybe only believe, but I think at some level we have come to understand that this idea of wishing for good weather or wishing for peace on earth, the a prayer for the good health of our friends and neighbors, these kinds of things are not just a waste of time. They have passed the test of time, really. Yeah.
Yeah, that's you got it. Makes me think too, the way you describe this, the difference between belief and understanding. That to me is a fascinating area, and not that big of a jump, but a very complicated jump. Meaning that it's a very small area, maybe, but it's also very dense. And I think
Hmm.
when it comes to someone like me who has a podcast, where people come on and share their experiences and, or share their research findings, things like that, it helps people maybe to believe who are skeptical. But then, we as a community of, believers rely on people like you to fully understand, okay, we believe that this thing is real. Now let's hand it over to the disciplined, the intelligent people to crack the code, so to speak, so we all can understand it. And I'm curious if you know there's a limit to the strength or the signal or the power of what we're describing on an individual basis. Because if we believe our minds or our consciousness can affect the random number generator sitting on a table with no cord or connective wire, maybe it's too big of a leap, maybe it's not, to think that our mind can affect everything else around us as well. And do you think that's a small power, or do you think that it's potentially limitless?
Well, I love that question, and I don't have a firm answer for it. I have to say, I hope that we are able progressively to tap into and exploit, really, first explore, but then take advantage of the potentials that we have. Because I think that there are great, not unlimited, but there are great possibilities that we haven't yet, most of us, learned to tap into. I mean, there are stories about you know individuals doing things that were really quite remarkable and impossible for most of us. Something like levitation. There's a famous and extremely well documented case from of Joseph of Cupertino or something, some Italian spiritual man who every now and then, without apparently trying or wanting to necessarily, would be found levitating, kind of floating in the air. And people around him didn't understand it, and they had no idea what was going on. And but they regarded it as a good reason to call this guy a saint. So anyway, that's a little bit far afield. I think we have a lot of potential for let's just say growing healthy flowers and healthy children. Partly because if we envision a future in which the flowers are big and blooming beautifully, and the children are happy, healthy, well fed, and all the things we want our children to be, well, it's much more likely that those kind of things will transpire. That's the real message of the business of prayer or wishing. If we are doing something that actually works, and we keep on doing it, so this is one way to put it that cannot offend anybody, and yet it's. I think it gives a kind of inkling about how to approach it. Let's just say that it really does not do any harm to pray for good health and your friends and neighbors. It will not do any harm. And on the other hand, there's a good chance that you'll move the needle very slightly.
Yeah, I mean, it is, in today's world, there is a connectivity that I don't think we've experienced in
Right.
such a stark way when it comes to, I don't know, it feels like the physical body maybe, or maybe the emotional self of the human being hasn't evolved quick enough to keep up with technology in the way of processing global grief and
Wow.
on
Yeah.
such a daily basis. And
I'm
I feel
totally
like
with you on that. Yeah.
it feels overwhelming. And I think we're witnessing the results of an overwhelmed populace when we try to understand what's happening still in Ukraine, the Gaza, war that's happening, the school shootings, the pandemic, all these things. And now the global village is overwhelming to the individual when it comes to the grief we have to process. But I think if nothing else, the silver lining maybe we can find is it shows you how connected we are emotionally, even if we don't necessarily, uh, even if we're not aware of it at the forefront of our mind, right?
Yeah. Just a couple of days ago, I sort of wound finished up a paper I'd been working on for a little while, and at the very end, uh, I, I suggest that there is an infosphere. That's the internet and the web and phones and so forth. It's an information sphere,
Oh,
and we have also a noosphere, which is this a kind of layer of intelligence that Teilhard de Chardin predicted, and which I think the Global Consciousness Project has been capturing to in some small degree. In any case, when we integrate those, the infosphere and the noosphere, I think will be at least in position to make a step forward. As it is, the world is full of tragedy, and I keep trying to fend off the depression about how badly we're doing when I personally believe so strongly that we could do well. We are all connected. We just don't know how to understand the connection in a conscious, aware way. And so it behooves us to try to learn that. But how can we get people who are just surviving bombings and yet more strafing from machine guns. How can we get people who are actually attacking others? How can we get those elements of our global consciousness to join in? So we got something like a brain that's got a whole bunch of sections that are disconnected. They're not actually transmitting, the neurotransmitters are not flowing in some places. I don't know. It's a thing I wish for most. If I'm going to be praying, the prayers are going to be aimed at somehow getting over the humps, and they're very major humps right now. I keep reading the researchers in this kind of social historical patterns are they declare that there is less violence and less war in the world now than there used to be, that it gets progressively better. It doesn't look like it. So maybe the infosphere is telling us too much, telling us more than we want to know about how
Yeah,
bad it is out there.
that
But
is
pray, everybody, pray.
that is interesting that it is when I hear something like that, it is reassuring in some, major way for me. And like, okay, well, these people know what they've done the research, they understand this, and the amplification knob has turned up too high, maybe on a very specific aspect of human behavior in the
Mm,
infosphere. And while the other areas are the knobs are muted, right?
yeah. Um, yeah. So there, probably as I do, that there are, I don't know whether the numbers are in the thousands or tens of thousands. There are groups all over the world. They don't know much about each other necessarily, but they're gradually coming together and forming larger groups. All of these groups have an aim that's very similar. It is to um, once again do the ceremony, do the ritual, once again gather and share the consciousness and the intention. And what I guess what's missing is a group that knows how to do decisions, Gurdjieff style. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, like global meditation groups. So, you pick times and
Yeah.
very specific times, and you all, intentionally, you know, find a general consensus on what we're going to be meditating about,
Yeah.
whether it's global peace or,
Yeah.
um, you
And we
know,
have we have some evidence from the Global Consciousness Project, and we'll actually get more probably from the new version, the GCP2 project. We have we've monitored those kinds of major global meditation events, the sort of thing where people work hard to get as many people as possible to come together uh, spiritually to meditate on peace. And we see a little bit of structure where there shouldn't be any in the data from the Global Consciousness Project uh, during those special moments. Not always, and it's not it's not overpowering, but it's real. We've done enough of it. We have some like 10,000 to 1 odds, having looked at these kinds of things 100 times over the past 20 years. We find that there's a consistent reaction of the global consciousness random number generator network, this physical device or instrument. It says, yes, I hear you. And it's not loud enough yet, or it's not maybe persistent enough, or I don't know what's missing. But anyway, it's a step in the right direction. And I think the instrument is telling us so.
yeah, that's, I do want to, I mean, we're running out of time very quickly here. I want to talk, there was two aspects,
Can we
from,
do an advertising break real
uh,
quick?
oh yeah, we could do that real quick. Let's take a break real quick, uh, for
Okay,
advertising.
I'll be right back.
Sure thing. Okay, so we're back. And just as a reminder, patrons over at the Patreon can get commercial free um, interviews and episodes. So you can find that. But so we want to talk about. I'm here with Dr. Roger Nelson. We've been talking about so much stuff, and there's so much more to potentially discuss. So I'm going to have to harass you via email uh, to come on the show again, but not nearly 5 years later. We want to talk about GCP2, and very quickly before we get into that, from what I'm able to understand from the Global Consciousness Project, it seemed like the the understanding and the awareness of the human creature through consciousness seemed to be, I don't know, a half step ahead of the actual results unfolding in real time with the results from, I mean, what I mean is it looked like when we're talking about Princess Di or we're talking about 9/11 specifically, am I misinterpreting this when it seems like the human intuition and empathy spikes moments before the actual event happens, as if our empathy is in the future of the physical world?
Um, that's a nice way to put it. I don't think it's misleading or wrong at all. I think we don't understand very much about the kind of edges of what we think of as our consciousness. But one of the things that we have good reason to believe is real is premonition and precognition. So we see evidence that this global consciousness, if you allow me to, with the freedom to just call it that, that this operationally defined network of consciousness around the world, it's got premonitions and precognitions too, just like a human does. Everybody, not everybody has had the experience, but probably at least you've talked to somebody or one of your relatives has said, "Oh man, I almost got into a crash, but I had some reason that I needed to drive, park on the side of the road for a little bit. And when I went on, I discovered this intersection where I would have been that was full of crushed cars. So people, I think the consciousness isn't a single point in time. It just as it spreads out in space, um, almost without limit, as far as we can tell. It also spreads out in time. And of course, it's easy to think about the past and memories, and it's less common for us to talk about premonitions of the future. But the future and the past are present in our mental present.
Wow, that's really fascinating to think about. And I know I have some psychic friends who are probably, their mind is perked up hearing such a thing, to think that they're conscious. I mean, because I guess that is a one way someone could backdoor an explanation for psychic abilities, is that if we have these individual consciousness that can tap into the global consciousness that can go through the dimension of time into the future, or not a linear point, it can potentially access information from those other points in that dimension.
Right. Another nice word that we may have used, but it's really stolen from physics. Doesn't mean exactly the same thing, but it's very much like what's described formally in physics. Non-locality. Our minds are not local. They actually live in a non-local universe. And what that means is the same thing I was saying before. There's a kind of extension in time as well as space for any kind of a non-local object, and that your mind is definitely a non-local object.
Wow, I mean, I just can't help but think about. I was just in a small town doing a show last week, and they had these banners over the street. It's called Manitou Springs in Colorado, this beautiful mountain town, and it just kept saying "buy local," like, support local. And when it comes to your mind, it's like, don't worry about local at all. It turns out you
Yeah,
don't have
by
to.
non-local.
Yeah, buy non-local, non-locally sourced. So
Yeah.
let's talk about the transition of the Global Consciousness Project into 2.0. if we can.
Right. Many years ago, I started thinking, I'm getting older and I won't, I really love this project. I think it's got a lot of value and has raised unanswered questions, lots of them. So what do we do? So I started thinking about and talking to people a little bit about somebody taking over and running this project on into the future. And one of my friends, Roland McCready, was already doing something a little bit similar in California in the HeartMath Institute. Anyway, I had the opportunity. We were at some meeting, and I said, "Roland, what do you think about the possibility of doing a what turns out to it now be called GCP 2.0, like a new version of the GCP?" And he said, "Okay, let's talk." So we now have been, uh, talking with a dozen people from HeartMath Institute and GCP and from IONS, the Institute of Nordic Sciences, and several other people have just kind of merged with our little group. Anyway, it's been, I think, 2 years roughly, or a little more perhaps, that we've been working on it. Now, the new network is actually in place, not finished. It's planned that the new version, GCP2, will have 1,000 nodes in the network spread all over the world, and some clusters in big cities and special places where we can do local kinds of experiments in addition to the non-local experiment that is, the main act. So there's an instrument which doesn't have I tried to get people to think, let's call it a GEM or a GEM. It's a six-sided and beautiful object with a bunch of LEDs that flash, giving messages of various kinds. It has not one, but four random number generators on it. And we have the program or the project GCP2 has its citizen science aspect. That means that we are interested in inviting people to become part of the project, maybe only hosting one of these devices, but also with the opportunity to actually chime in and say, why don't we see if there's a correlation with this Google search term, or what about football games? Or in Europe, that's football, um, and so on. So in other words, and how about, can I download the data and have at it with some analysis that I think you guys ought to be doing? And so citizen science aspect and a much bigger network, a big team of very smart people working on it. It's pretty exciting.
That's really exciting. And, I think when it comes to understanding, the some of the things that the project has shown already through, I guess, how many decades are we going on now where you've been doing this work?
It's 3 decades,
3 decades,
almost.
yeah.
I mean, I started in 1998, so it's literally 25 or 26 years.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Let me go back to the GCP 2.0 thing, give it a web address. That's GCP2, the number, gcp2.net. And that goes to a website that's still developing. So there's a lot to be done and a lot of things that people will wish they could find and they can't. Um, but it also will, give people who are interested. It costs money actually we're asking people to pay the cost of the device in order to participate in it as a device host. See, I was going to say something else about it. I guess it was just the idea that citizen science is important. Oh, um, another kind of thing that we're doing in GCP2 that we never did, and GCP1 is to concurrently record information from on like using companies that specialize in this to get a measure of sentiment in the whole world. Um, and with the idea is that they will lay down a trace of all that sentiment information right next to the GCP2 random number information, and then find out if there's a correlation. And we predict that there will be, as you would not be surprised to know. Same kind of thing. So the citizen science kinds of input could involve things like that. There's a lot of questions that we raise that we haven't answered very well. You know, what is the effect of distance, and how long is a global event? You know,
Oh,
is there some kind of parallel structure, and if so, is the temporal character similar to that of a human brain? And I've done a lot of calculations and written a paper on uh, some very great similarities between the activity of the data generated in what we're calling a global consciousness and data that come from a human brain. We do the same. We respond to a flash of light or a loud sound by having a special kind of wave that gets repeated again every time we flash the light. The same thing looks like it's happening for the GCP. Every time we have a great event, we get something that looks like this evoked potential in a human brain. I'm going on too much, and we're
no, I mean
probably time.
that's fascinating, and I'm visualizing almost like a 3D model of a living, almost animated brain at some point. That
Take it.
oh my gosh, that's really cool stuff. When I grow up, I want to be just like you. And if I ever manage to grow up, I
Yeah.
I'm going to link the website and some other links for anyone listening in the show description, so they'll be easily able to just click on over and check it out. In my research leading up to this, I did find I don't think I mean if there's anyone listening to this who's a scientist, or I don't know if this is part is the Google group part of the citizen science. That seems to be a lot of really smart people talking about things that are way beyond my pay scale. When I did find there was a Google group conversation with a bunch of doctors and scientists, I was like, I don't know what's going on over here, but they're doing the big work for GCP and GCP2.
I'm not sure I know about that.
The GCP work, it says. Oh
Oh,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I guess I forgot that it was Google.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. There's a lot going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
GCP work is an act is a not highly active, but potentially very interesting group. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So I'll make sure everybody listening has links to the right spots to find out more. And I really look forward to the results. And one last quick question:
Hmm.
Is there do you does GCP do you do a yearly event of any kind, updating people on the year's events and what maybe new findings you may have found, almost like, I don't know, like a conference or a live stream or anything like that?
Um, I I don't think that kind of thing is implemented yet, but there is um, there's plenty of room, and it only requires uh, the mind power, or I don't know what you call it exactly. It just needs activity. There should be a blog. I had one in for the original GCP, which I updated every month, and not that there was always any fabulous new thing, but there usually was something going on, and so I fell out of doing that when the formal project ended, but I think GCP2 will have one. Um, it will probably have also I don't know what you call that, a kind of a chat group that people can belong to, a little bit like GCP work, only probably more active. So yeah, those are I don't there's those are tentative plans.
Yeah, well, trust me, I understand the trying to manage all the prongs of something like this, and it's you know, you gotta, you know, not at the disservice of the overall thing by spreading yourself too thin in other areas, you know, at least in the moment. So this has
Yeah,
been
I
incredible.
want to address just remark though that we had 2 or 3 times we had meetings that it's mostly the people who were involved were invited to, but it could, I think, the GCP2 group might very well be inclined to put on a show like a conference, which could have a invitation to the public, of course, to all of the citizen scientists who are connected, and then, but with talks, with presentations of stuff that, we're working on and so on. That's a very good idea, I think, whose time will come. It'll probably be another year.
Yeah, well, I think especially nowadays, with it seems to be more and more people around the world are becoming aware of an interconnectedness with consciousness and with each other, even if they're very far apart from each other physically. I think
Hmm.
that the time is becoming very ripe and juicy for such an event. I
Yeah.
know I would be there 100%, and I know a lot of people would love to, you know, just have a couple days or day and a half or whatever it is of, you know, seeing the results and the astounding evidence that you've been able to compile, you know, showing the connectedness of consciousness and basically at the fundamental level of how we're all in this together. And I think it's an important time in history for that.
Yes, thanks. I do too. And my plea or my prayer is that we will learn how to bring what's unconscious up a bit into awareness so that we're not only conscious of our connections, but become more cognizant of the possibility of conscious evolution. It's pretty logically easy to see that if you decide to evolve, decide in Gurdjieff's sense, you will. We we have so much potential that's unrealized. How nice it will be to decide to unveil it all.
Yeah. And yeah, I've already written down that book, Meetings with Remarkable Men, I believe is the title.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wrote that down earlier when you mentioned it. Well, Doctor, this has been great. Thank you for joining the show again. I know I really loved our chat. You know, I hope we can, you know, revisit this conversation again in the future at some point. And just as a reminder to everybody, we'll be linking the website and all that good stuff. Is there any one last thing you want to say other than what you've said already?
Yes. I love you all, and you love each other. All we have to do is act on it, right?
Yeah, I mean, beautifully said. And thank you again so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And until next time.
My pleasure. And thanks, Ryan. Bye bye.